teenagers in the West Bank, one in Petunia, yeah, that brings the, so one of the problems about it is that all this thing, I think, all this fight of who started, yeah, it's a lot of time a camouflage. Yeah. I think it's a less of a story. Yeah, it's less of importance in a way. What's important is what we do, and what's the context of that. And what we do, I spoke about, and the context of it is 48 years of occupation. 48 years of occupation, of military rule over the West Bank and Gaza. Yes? No, I don't see it as 67 years of occupation. I think occupation is a military regime. It's a very specific thing, people without rights, under military rule. Yeah, and that's the story. Look, breaking the silence as a group is not about how the IDF fights the wars of the State of Israel. Yeah, after the Second Lebanon War in 2006, we haven't said anything. We didn't collect testimonies, we didn't have campaigns about it, because the Second Lebanon War had nothing to do with our military rule over Palestinians. Protective Edge has everything to do with our military rule over Palestinians, yeah? And in a way, one needs to understand that the occupation, the military regime in the West Bank has its own characters. You have checkpoints and arrest operations, and in Gaza we have a siege, and every 2-3 years we go and have an operation, and every 2-3 years it gets worse. Yeah? That's kind of like the kind of relationship we have with Gaza. You know? And I think that's the context, and that's what's important. The other question was about human shields. Yeah, the Hamas being accused of using human shields, and Palestinian testimonies were about the IDF using human shields in Gaza. And the question was whether we have testimonies on the matter. And the answer is actually on Protective Edge we do not have testimonies on the matter. We don't have soldiers who in their testimonies spoke about it. Does that mean it didn't happen? No. It means that we don't have the evidence that it happened. If we had it, we would publish. I would say that, generally speaking, if you look at the trend in the IDF, you see less and less usage of Palestinian civilians as human shield. When I served, yeah, asking a soldier from my time whether you use the Palestinians as human shield is like asking you, do you breathe to survive? Yeah, like I used, in hundreds of cases, Palestinian civilians as human shield. When we came, every arrest operation we conducted was conducted through the procedure we call the neighbor procedure. What it is? Very simple procedure. You come into the house, you come to the house of the suspect, you put soldiers around, make sure no one can escape, you knock on the doors of the neighbor, you take the neighbor, put him in front of you as you approach the house, the neighbor procedure. So in case the suspect opens fire, the Palestinian neighbor will take the fire. And actually in late 2002, a Palestinian neighbor was killed by Palestinian fire. So he fulfilled his job, so to speak, as the human shield. And Israeli human rights organizations petitioned the High Court against this procedure, and the High Court actually banned the procedure ultimately. You think we stopped doing it? The answer is no. We just called it in a different way. It was called bringing a friend, and we continue to do exactly the same. But for the sake of truth, it took 4 years, 3-4 years after, till the court decision trickled down to most of the units. So as time goes by, less and less units and less soldiers use Palestinian civilians as human shields, and this is actually one of the procedures that statistically and relatively would be very hard to find, yeah, in an operation like Protective Edge, or even in Caslet, by the way, in 2009, where actually we did have testimonies of one unit in one area, East Beit Amedrabo, in the east side of Gaza City, where there was, but it was a very specific unit, special forces, that is not that used to operating in the occupied Palestinian territories, and that's why, you know, they didn't really update their procedures, yeah. So, but it's less and less happening in the IDF. The last question was whether soldiers who break the silence pay a price. And what happens to them? So look, last year we interviewed about 128 soldiers. And officers, about 30%, about a third of them, were still conscripts. Yeah, they were still serving soldiers. That means they could go to prison for months for speaking to us. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we would never publish their identity. Yeah? We're not. The least we can do is try to protect our comrades, yeah, our members. So, in terms of secret police and all these kind of stuff, no, we are not there. We're not there yet. Thank God. I hope we're never going to get there. But yeah, different people have different stories and come from different backgrounds and pay a different price socially and in the family. Most of our guys, this is one of the reasons why most of our guys don't reveal their identity. Yeah, only about 10%, a bit more than 10% of our members are, so to speak, out of the closet, yeah? Publicly with their full name and face, breaking the silence. Yeah? Most of them stay behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, this is not anonymous because we know who they are. Yeah? We just choose not to publish their identity because they don't want to. Some of them it's for legal issues, some of them it's for censorship issues. Yeah, they served in classified sensitive units. Some of them are because they're still serving in the global presence. Some of them is because family. Some of them because pressure inside the unit. Yeah, different reasons why people would choose not to publish their name.
Okay, we have time for just the last round. I'm going to choose from this section. This gentleman, middle section, this woman, and the one up there. All right? No, I'm sorry. This is the last round. After this round, I'm sure that Yuda will be happy to answer your question informally after this round. All right?
Accept.
Okay. Let's start.
Just maybe something to say about how these two military doctrines are related to international conventions on this point. Kind of operation.
Yes.
My name is Isabella. Thank you very much for sharing your story. Given the fact that you consider the internal investigations that go on that there are hoax, would you be in favor as a veteran and as somebody who may get into trouble with this, would you be in favor of holding criminal investigations on an international level?
And the last one there, up there.
My name is Jan. I would like to ask you, you were talking about the repetitive wars on Gaza. I was wondering if you would agree that one of the goals is not only to eliminate threats from Hamas or other groups, but also to prevent Gaza from becoming an economical, viable place. I heard the term mowing the lawn in that respect. I don't know if you can comment on that as well.
Yeah, I'll try to take them in the order. The first question was how these two doctrines of the zero risk at all cost and the Dakhya doctrine relate to international conventions. I said a bit about international humanitarian law, yeah? And as I said, I see these doctrines, yeah, I've used the military jargon and called it a targeted assassination of international law. The disproportionate nature of the Dakhya is obvious. The zero risk at all cost is a very interesting doctrine that has developed a new concept of military ethics that has been developed in the Israeli army in the last 10 years. More accurately, 12 years. And again, I don't want to kind of like bore you with military ethics and philosophy, but there is this theory by Michael Walzer that is called, about the just wars. Yeah? How you're supposed to conduct a war. And basically, there is a new concept of military ethics in the IDF that argues for a ladder of 4 different values of life. Where at the top, Israeli civilians are, then come Israeli soldiers, then come Palestinian civilians, then come Palestinian militants and terrorists. So if international law is about taking civilians outside of the conflict, what this doctrine is about, putting them at the center below our soldiers. Yeah? This is the moral, ethical justification for the zero-risk doctrine at all costs. Yeah? So this is really a serious challenge. Yeah? So the impact of these doctrines is way behind the results we see in Gaza, but they're also shaping the way we think of war, the way we think of ethics, the way we think of law, and what is just and what is accepted. You know, last year, Avi Bnayahu, probably this name means nothing to you, but Avi Bnayahu was the IDF spokesperson during Operation Cast-Lead in 2009. Yeah? So he gave a talk to a group of graduate students in Tel Aviv University. And in the classroom, 2 guys were members of Breaking the Silence. So the second he opened the mouth, they pressed record because they realized it's going to be interesting. And indeed, it was a very interesting talk, where he said many things. But one of the things he said is he congratulated the professors of military ethics that came up with this idea of 4 new values, yeah, of life. Yeah? This idea that puts our soldiers in front of the civilians of the other side. And then he went on in saying that the international community is confused, they don't get it yet. But we'll teach them. They'll accept it ultimately. Yeah, so this idea is really about rewriting what is acceptable by doing things. Yeah, so if we would just, it's like, you know, it's like a child, yeah, you always kind of like move the boundaries a bit. Yeah, it's like, you look to the right and look to the left, and mommy and daddy don't say anything again. Yeah? So it's like, if we'll just violate enough, if we'll just break the rules enough, we'll rewrite the rules. Yeah? So we're really on a mission here to change the idea and the way of what is acceptable and what is not during the fight. The other question was, because I believe that internal investigations in the army and the IDF are facade, whether we would support an international investigation. So as Breaking the Science, as I said, we did not call for an international investigation. First and foremost, we want an Israeli investigation. Yeah, we want an Israeli civilian investigation outside of the army. We're Israelis, and our first concern and what we want, and what we strive for, is for our own society, yeah, to be able, and to take responsibility over what is done in our name. So that is what we are calling for, and that is what we are supporting. For the last question was whether don't I think that the objective about this, you know, sequence of operations in Gaza is not only to eliminate threats, but also to make sure that Gaza doesn't become viable economically. Actually, I'm not sure that I would agree with that statement. Interestingly enough, if you look at the forces inside Israel who are fighting for the reconstruction of Gaza, what is the strongest voice for the reconstruction of Gaza is the IDF. Yeah? And we're not going to start here and open the way of what is called the fabric of life concept in the IDF. Yeah, it's a whole theory that was developed that ultimately, yeah, the idea, if you ask me, you mentioned a phrase that is called mowing the lawn, yeah? Cutting the grass. This is a phrase used by the IDF. Interestingly enough, I actually published an op-ed exactly on this in Gaza. But that connects to something I mentioned. If you come and ask me, yeah, what's the ultimate goal of Israel's military actions in Gaza and the West Bank, I would say very simple. It's about maintaining preserving and entrenching our absolute military rule over Palestinians. Yeah? Most of what the IDF does in the occupied territories, some of it is about fighting terrorism, some of it is defensive in a sense, most of it is offensive, and most of them is about making sure Palestinians will never be free. This is not being viable economically. Yeah? It's not confused. The understanding, the framework. This is about making sure that we will stay in power. And what we do is many different things. We have a toolbox. Different areas, different parts of the occupied territories get the treatment via different tools in the box. Okay? In the West Bank, we do 1, 2, 3, 4. And in Gaza, we do 7, 8, 9, 11. Okay? I highly recommend, if I'm allowed to do promotion, to a book by Breaking the Silence that was published a few years ago. It was actually translated to Dutch. I think the name of the publisher is Arbeid Press here in the Netherlands. It's called Breaking the Silence in Dutch, am I right? If I remember right. It's about analysis of the system, how it works. Okay? That's where we kind of like look at hundreds of testimonies we gathered, 10 years, different units, different times, different ranks, and we basically show the offensive nature of the system of occupation. Yeah? And that's cutting the grass. It's a fascinating analogy if you think of it. When you grow up flowers, yeah, you grow flowers, so one leaf dries, you cut the leaf, you don't cut the entire thing. You cut one here, one there, you trim it. But grass is something you cut everything, all the time. And it needs to go on and on and on again. Because the only way to rule people against their will is to make them fear you. And once they get used to a level of fear, you have to increase it, and increase it, and increase it. And every time their heads come up, you need to cut it. That's cutting the grass. And that's what I meant, yeah? There's a toolbox that cuts the grass all the time. That ultimately is there to make sure Palestinians will not be free, will not be independent. And again, in the West Bank we have an entire system of how we do it, and in Gaza we have an entire system of how we do it. So the goal is not to make them viable economically. Exactly the opposite. A catastrophe is not good. Because our goal is to sustain it. And extreme situations are not sustainable. That's why the military is calling for the rehabilitation of, the reconstruction of Gaza. Because they know, part of the system is hitting hard, but then rebuilding. But then having the relief. Because otherwise hitting hard is not worth it. Again, it's part of a concept of fabric of life. I'm not going to go into it, but in the book, if you'll get it, that's the 3rd chapter of the book. It's about the fabric of life. And it can explain more seriously. So that's what I think the system is about.
Okay, thank you very much, Judah. So you're welcome to ask him questions informally. Few announcements before you leave. I hope I'm not going to forget anything. The booklets with the testimonies are here. You're encouraged to give €5 donation for the booklet. They're here. Those of you who read Hebrew, some of the Hebrew stuff is there on the table outside. There's also, I don't know if you noticed, but there are photographs here on the wall, and in 7 locations we are also opening an exhibition by a photographer called Anna Pak, and she has been in summer 2014 in Gaza. She took these pictures as part of the collective called Active Stills, and her photographs are presented here, and we're going to open the exhibition on Friday at 6:30 in Newland, which is next to the Moudenpoort Station, not far from some of you IUC students. And what was the last thing? The Olive Tree campaign is also there, and if you're interested in joining it or donating a tree or even going and planting in Palestine, please feel free to speak to them. Anything else? No. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
One thing that I didn't mention is you can go on our website if you're interested to read more testimonies and find out about other testimonies we publish in other publications. We're of course on Facebook, Twitter, and all these kind of stuff to get updates and to basically spread the word. So thank you very much.